I think this album broke my brain. What is up, metal and heavy music fans? It's Flight of Icarus again with MetalTrenches.com, and today we have a review of The Armed and their new album, Ultrapop. And hey, if you like to be kept up to date with the best and brightest metal bands and albums from the underground and above, then stick with me by hitting that subscribe button down below. The Armed was a hardcore group formed in Detroit, Michigan in 2009. I initially caught wind of them with 2015's EXCELLENT Untitled, which to me is just the pinnacle of highly aggressive metallic hardcore and easily one of my most re-listened albums of the entire last decade. This was followed up by the somewhat surprising Only Love in 2018, which was the beginning of a new evolution in their sound, one the band described as their own aggressive take on pop music. Now, if that was the initial push over the cliff in that direction, Ultrapop finds them in complete freefall. True to its very concise and descriptive title, this is not really a metal or hardcore album, it's more of an art house amplified version of pop music. Think if Andy Warhol fronted a hardcore band. Honestly, if we are middling over genre tags, I would describe it as more of a indie noise rock kind of album. Even the cover reminds me of something I'd expect to find on like a Chance the Rapper or Tyler the Creator album. And ultimately, I found myself listing band comparisons I never would have expected. But in short, it's like MGMT and the Animal Collective were fed through a meat grinder. And the title track makes that clear right from the start. No fake out, no trickery, very upfront that this is going to be something different, big, sparkly, shimmery sound, all atmosphere, and then they follow this up with the lead single All Futures, which now that the whiplash of my initial confusion has worn off, it's grown on me quite a bit. I actually initially described this in my reaction as The Armed go The Killers, but really it's more of like a cross between Death from Above 1979 and like Yoko Ono. I love the shrieking, yeah, which offset the ketamine-infused mumbling of the clean vocals. And then all of this rounded out with bright, psychedelic guitars, kind of indie meets modern Nine Inch Nails, especially that one really kind of warbly riff they have, and the whole mix just soaked in fuzz. Other tracks in this vein include A Life So Wonderful. This one got me thinking about like the Strokes as well. Again, these comparisons just blew my mind. It was like early 2000s me just coming all back. But yeah, that sound just again filtered through extra layers of like art house madness. No doubt some will find it very pretentious, but for me it works in this weird way that I didn't think it would. I also like how in the final moments of this song the distortion and noise just gets louder and louder, ultimately overtaking the music. There's also An Iteration, which has a music video featuring David Hayter, who you might know better as the voice of Solid Snake from Metal Gear Solid.
Colonel, I'm trying to sneak around, but I'm dummy thick, and the clap of my ass cheeks keeps alerting the guards.
This isn't the first time that the Armed have had a celebrity in a video either. Tommy Wiseau, of all people, of The Room fame, actually shows up in Role Models to simply press play on the stereo and then sit in the frame to listen to the song and kind of like dance around to it. Really, their videos have just been getting more and more strange and diverse and artistic, and I love it. This is some really amazing stuff to complement this strange music. And even the visuals aside, this is a very catchy song. Then there's Average Death, another song potentially overshadowed by its almost overwhelmingly colorful music video. Seriously, this one is a real gluttonous feast for the senses. The music on this one's kind of like Smashing Pumpkins getting extra weird like on Machina 2. It's not one of my favorite tracks, but it definitely conjures a strange dreamlike melancholy every time I listen to it. It has this very detached kind of 90s vibe.
It may be bleak, but this music is really getting to the crowd.
Making teenagers depressed is like shooting fish in a barrel.
From the deeper cuts, I also really enjoy Bad Selection, which is a highly electronically focused track with a really fun canned beat. It reminds me a lot of things like The Faint, and maybe with just a touch of Block Party's later material. Now, if you do still want something a little heavier, you've got much more noisy and abrasive tracks like Masunaga Vapors. This one's just a violent eruption of distorted hardcore screams performed over a seemingly unending spiral of dizzying, chaotic, yet still strangely upbeat sounding guitar riffs. I picture someone tumbling through a bad trip-induced Technicolor nightmare. Dude took some bad PCP on this one. There's also Big Shell, which is kind of like if you throw the Pixies, Sonic Youth, and especially Crystal Castles into a blender, this is what you get. And by the way, check out those first two Crystal Castles albums, highly recommended. But yeah, just pure violence, a cacophony of echoing female screams, punctuated rhythms, and just a drug-fueled madness spiraling down the drain. This probably could have worked as an alternate soundtrack to the final montage from Requiem for a Dream. Faith Medication has kind of a more chaotic version of punk rock going on for it, especially in the bass. This has this big, beefy bass riff that really does kind of steal the show. And then, of course, more aggressive howls and wailing guitars, 70s sounding classic rock solos. What more could you want? And then there's Where Man Knows Want. This is like a heavier industrial sounding track, kind of more like, again, modern Nine Inch Nails and Filter mixed with the Strokes vocals once more. Something that definitely shouldn't work, but oddly does. And there's also a very heavy electronic glitchy vibe on the very satirically titled Real Folk Blues. And then it all comes to an end with the harrowing conclusion of The Music Becomes a Skull. This one's really like a dark, haunting, almost chilling swan song. More like something I would have expected from the latest Daughters album. Ultimately, listening for this review felt more like doing a research project, especially with all the bands just like popping back into my head that I had not listened to in a very long time, and then digging through and reminiscing, having some nostalgia with all the cover art, looking at it again. It's just so left field, and yet so strangely familiar too, as somebody who went through a pretty significant indie dive in the 2000s. Now with that in mind, I did find myself wondering, would we be discussing this album as much if it were released by one of the groups I've mentioned? I'm not really sure. Regardless, it's easily one of the most unique things you will hear this year, and despite still being unsure of how much I like it, I can't seem to stop listening to it either. Similar to what I said about the new Genghis Tron, you need to have the right expectations going into this. If you just want the unbridled hardcore sound of Untitled,
you're gonna have a bad time.
But if you dug Only Love and are ready for them to lean even harder into those elements, you'll probably love it. I will say this, I think that Ultrapop is way more interesting and has much more staying power than Dream Weapon, but you can check out my review of that for more thoughts. Turning to my scales, I give Ultrapop a 9 for enjoyability. Honestly, this is the hardest scale here because it's another case where enjoy feels like the wrong word. Morbidly curious would be a better descriptor. I give it a 9 for musicianship. This is the definition of controlled chaos. The compositions frequently feel like they are on the brink of crumbling to pieces, and yet the arms still manage to turn them into completely viable songs that even have some pretty solid hooks to hold on to. And I give it a 10 for innovation. If there is a scale that was easy to score on this right from the get-go, this was the one. You will not hear another album like this in 2021, and maybe not in the next decade unless it is also from The Armed. Lots of familiar elements on display for somebody who used to go to Lollapalooza every year, but brought together in a way that is entirely unique. So a 9.3 overall and a solid A for The Armed and Ultrapop. And boy, some of you are gonna hate it. Y'all, thanks as always for watching, and let me know down in the description what you thought of this album. I am really interested to hear the different reactions. I have a feeling that this is going to be pretty split, so let's have a conversation whether you loved it or hate it. I'm really interested to hear why on both fronts. And then, of course, stick around. I got plenty more videos coming right after this one. More album reviews, interviews, tier lists, you name it, we've got it. So plenty of reasons to subscribe if you have not already. You can also chat with us on Discord and support on Patreon. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.